It's 11:59 at Gun Owners Radio, and this is the Penn Patriot, music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I've got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, and another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind American lines, this is your song.
Hi, I'm Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, with an important update about our work here in the department. This month, the Civil Rights Division has started a Second Amendment section, and I'm really excited about this. For the first time, the DOJ Civil Rights Division and the DOJ at large will be protecting and advancing our citizens' right to bear arms as part of our civil rights work. As Attorney General Pam Bondi has said, the Second Amendment is not a second-class right, and I couldn't agree more with my boss. The Second Amendment was ratified in 1791 as part of the Bill of Rights, and yet it has received less attention from the Supreme Court than some of our other important civil rights. However, recently, the court has really stepped up and made clear that states cannot interfere with the right of law-abiding citizens to carry commonly used firearms. So far, the DOJ Civil Rights Division has sued Los Angeles for unreasonable multi-year delays in granting concealed carry permits. We've supported a couple of cases in different courts through our amicus briefs with the Solicitor General's office. I personally argued the Barnett case in Illinois in the Seventh Circuit, and we did another case in Hawaii challenging that state's unreasonable restrictions. Some of the things we're seeing, and that is going to be the focus of our work around the country, includes multi-thousand-dollar costs for citizens to apply for concealed carry permits. Other jurisdictions are having unreasonably long delays. Other jurisdictions are outlawing guns that should be protected by the Second Amendment under the recent Supreme Court precedents. Now, everyone here knows that common sense teaches us that a criminal is less likely to attack a house that is guarded by an armed citizen. Secondly, the right to bear arms equalizes the ability of those of us, women, people with disabilities, and others who might otherwise be more vulnerable, to be able to protect ourselves. And this is important. And I don't mean to detract from law enforcement. They have a very important role as well. But the Second Amendment was passed, and as the Federalist Papers and other founding documents make clear, to allow citizens the individual right to bear arms for lawful purposes. We will be protecting that right here in this Department of Justice. The President issued an executive order making this clear just 2 weeks into his tenure, and I've been working on the Second Amendment section ever since I got here to the DOJ. So stay tuned. You're going to see a lot more action from this Department of Justice to protect your Second Amendment rights. Thanks.
Okay, so last week we did a show on the governor's race, and we talked a lot about Sheriff Chad Bianco from Riverside. We've had him on the show. In fact, this show and myself, we've been fans for a long time. And one of the interesting things, it was a very popular clip. People wanted to hear about, okay, well, how can a candidate like Chad Bianco win in California? Is it even a possibility? And we talked a lot about that. It got a lot of positive feedback. But I definitely noticed in the comments section that people were accusing Sheriff Bianco of bending the knee to BLM, Black Lives Matter, back in 2020 when, I guess it was 2021, when the BLM riots were starting, or maybe it was 2020. And I wanted to explore that. We explored it at the time. We talked about it at the time. But there seems to be this narrative that has been created. Did Sheriff Bianco bend the knee to BLM, and what exactly does that mean? So first off, I want to talk about what does that mean to bend the knee? I mean, we know what it literally means, getting down on one knee, but really what they're talking about is to show submission or show obedience or loyalty to someone else in a position of power. It's basically you saying, hey, you're the one in charge. I'm bending the knee. I'm getting down on a knee and passing my authority over to you. That's what's meant. I think that people use it a little more broadly than that. But what exactly did happen? Well, this was right after COVID started, and it was right after the George Floyd riots were beginning. And Sheriff Bianco, there was a demonstration in Riverside County, and there was a lot going on, and so he and his officers were there to keep the peace. So what exactly happened? Well, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to show some context here. So let's show just the first 30 seconds, that first clip, Rich. So that's the context. That's actually what was going on, and it has all the look and feel and sounds of a demonstration that could potentially turn into a riot. This was very early in the whole BLM happening. There weren't Ferguson hadn't burned down. I mean, this was one of the very early demonstrations that potentially could have turned into a riot. Now, I get what people are saying about Bianco bending the knee. But the reality is here, this was a real thing. This wasn't just some passive demonstrators that were showing up with some signs. These were people that were showing up in all the intelligence that they had gathered, all their actions that were happening, everything that we saw. These were for folks that were showing up to provoke a riot in every sense of the word. Maybe not the entire crowd, but enough of the crowd was absolutely there to provoke a riot of some kind. So here's I want to show you exactly what Bianco's reaction was to that. So let's play that second clip.
Listen, right now we are talking downtown Riverside. We are talking all of you. We're talking me. We're talking all of us. This gentleman I was just talking with, until we together, not just me, not just you, until we do something to fix this, we're always going to have this. Now this protest downtown, this rally, let's call it a rally. We don't want it to be a protest. We want it to be a rally to make things different. The reason why we had to put a curfew in this tonight is because what we found and what we were being told by our surrounding areas is that the majority of the people that were going to cause conflict and problems aren't even from Riverside. They aren't even from Riverside.
So there he is at front and center. He's not sitting in his cruiser. He's not sitting back at his office and sending some sergeant to go in, but he's actually front and center with the leadership of this BLM, potential riot.
Remember that we are not lawyers and nothing that we say is to be taken as legal advice. Our sponsor, John Dillon, is a lawyer, and he has been helping to fight those gun violence restraining orders, GVROs, and more. So if you know somebody that's had their self-defense rights taken away without due process, give John a call. His website is dillonlawgp.com, and his phone number is 760-642-7150.
Working things out, making sure that it doesn't escalate. Standing there at the very front of the line saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's get this figured out. You heard him say, I don't even want to call this a protest. Let's just call this a demonstration. You heard him say, hey, we had to do a curfew because we heard that there were going to be some agitators that were coming from out of town. This isn't behavior you normally see from a sheriff. You don't normally see a sheriff say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go right to the front of the line here and talk to these folks. We're going to try to de-escalate this situation. His goal clearly was to make sure that everybody went home safe. No matter what it took. So, I don't understand why he isn't getting more praise for that. I seriously can't think of a time and couldn't find any footage of another sheriff standing right in the front, right on the front lines, and saying, hey, Let's talk about this. Let's go face to face and get this figured out. I'm here right now. Let's talk about it side by side and make sure that this doesn't escalate. I want to make sure that you don't get hurt. Let's make sure that we don't get hurt. Let's make sure that we all go home safe and secure, and that this demonstration, this protest doesn't turn into a riot. Now, the actual incident that they're talking about where he bent the knee, let's take a look at that.
Wow, so you saw law enforcement coming together with the protesters there in discussion, and there you go. You see him take that knee.
This is the news
as they
coverage.
talked about.
Now listen to what he says.
As they talked about
in just a minute.
how they were going to handle this moment, the protesters in direct conversation there with the sheriff. Just soak this moment in for a second. Riverside County.
Watch the
Look at all the
conversation
law
he
enforcement
has with the
officers there
actual
that have taken a knee.
leader of the
As
BLM.
organizers are getting everybody there to take a knee.
Here's where the problem is happening.
So look at them there in discussion.
I can't. All right.
I can't make them. Okay, stop. So what's going on here? I mean, is he quite literally bending his knee? Yeah, he knelt. A couple of his other officers knelt as well. But what are they actually doing? What he was saying to them was that basically the organizer was saying, "Hey, how come not everybody's bending the knee? How come all the officers aren't bending the knee?" And what he was saying was, "Look, I can't make them pray. I can't make them pray." He could have ordered all of his officers to say, "Hey, everybody take a knee," but that's not what was going on there. The organizers were saying, "Hey, in order for us to keep the peace, how do you feel about us kneeling and praying together?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." That's clearly what was going on. And by all accounts, that's exactly what happened. And it's not unusual. You see that in all kinds of other situations. You saw that in the civil rights marches back in the 60s. I mean, kneeling to pray with people that are on two sides of an issue or whatever. It's completely normal. It's completely reasonable to do that. Now, I get it. When people see that, what they actually see is, show that first clip, Rich. What they actually are thinking in their head is this ridiculousness that happened after that, where the Democrats in Washington, D.C. decided to take this BLM situation and turn it into a political issue. And they related, bending the knee to BLM became a different thing after this happened. Because it was completely insincere. It was completely ridiculous. It was a political maneuver. I get that. But don't let that confuse what happened with Sheriff Bianco in that situation. In his situation, he went to the front of the line of a potential riot, said, "Hey, we got to figure this out. We're all on the same team here, meaning we're all human beings. None of us want to go home hurt. Let's figure this out. Let's make sure that this is peaceful. If you guys got to demonstrate. But let's not turn this into a riot, And when they said, "Hey, well, can let's kneel and pray together," that's exactly what they did. They knelt and prayed together. And when he said, "Hey, how come not all your officers are kneeling?" he said, "Well, I can't order my officers to pray." That's exactly what was going on. And I don't get the analysis. I don't understand let's just say he did bend the knee and he wasn't actually there to pray. What exactly do you think happened there? Do you think that the sheriff's department in Riverside said, "Hey, you know what? We give up to BLM. BLM, you guys take over the whole county now. We're changing our views. We're changing our policies. We're just going to give you guys our cruisers and our badges and our guns. The kingdom is now yours. We're kneeling to you. We're bending the knee." What exactly do you think happened? I don't understand the implication. What was clear to me is that you had a sheriff who was proactive, who went and handled business and said, "Hey, you know what? All my folks are going to go home safe, and all the folks who showed up here to protest are going to go home safe." That's exactly what happened. And by the way, if you look at the rest of the months following that summer of all the BLM riots, he wasn't exactly a pro-BLM sheriff. In fact, I remember when they said, "Hey, are you going to let people out of jail because of COVID?" He said, "No, if you don't want to get COVID in jail, then don't do something that'll, end up in jail." And they all got heavily criticized for that. The BLM folks heavily criticized him for that. So I don't understand what the point is that you're trying to make. I think that there are a lot of people who have a different bone to pick with Sheriff Bianco, and they're using this against them. They're trying to create this narrative in order to, turn people off to him. But I think that if you're reasonable, level-headed, if you're somebody who is rational, you're looking at this situation and going, hey, wow, that was actually fairly impressive. The guy kept a riot from happening. He was the sheriff of a county and actually went down and dealt with it. He didn't send a lieutenant. He didn't send a sergeant. He went down and actually, face-to-face, toe-to-toe said, hey, I'm here. Let's get this solved. No one's going to get hurt. Everyone's going to go home safe. And you just don't see that from a sheriff. This is one of the reasons he's one of my favorite elected officials. So I wanted to point that out. I wanted to go over that. I just don't think that the narrative is accurate. And I don't know. What are your thoughts, Dakota?
Yeah, I think unless you have been in a situation like this where you are law enforcement in the midst of a crowd where tensions are high and there's chances that things are going to escalate, I don't think you really understand. You'd have to watch a lot more of the footage. I think the video that kind of went viral is this really short clip of Chad Bianco with a knee bent on the ground, and he's sitting there talking to one of the activists who was in charge of the rally. And I think that without more context, without watching, maybe even just like 10 minutes worth of video, you're not really going to understand what was trying to be accomplished there. And I think a lot of times, whether you agree with somebody's, reason for a protest or a rally or whatever, a good way to keep things from escalating is to get on their level and to treat them like a human being and to try to have a conversation with them. And I think that's what Chad was doing. We want de-escalation in policing, right? Like, we want there to be less violence in our streets. So I think this was actually like a demonstration of a sheriff who was not allowing his ego to be too big to do what he needed to do in the moment for the benefit of everybody there. I think that they were able to keep things pretty under wraps in Riverside, and a lot of other places were unable to do that. So
yeah, I don't agree with the narrative, and the people I'm seeing who are advancing this narrative are either people with a different agenda. They're not actually concerned about this. They're just using it against him because they don't like him for some other reason. Or they're people who have heard this narrative from that first group and have bought into it because they just haven't seen, the full context, like you're saying. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you really just stop and think or take a look at exactly what happened, or think about like, well, what exactly are what am I implying here? I mean, he didn't turn over the sheriff's department to BLM. Like, what exactly am I afraid of? He didn't change his views and become, a fan of George Floyd. None of that happened. What he did do is he made sure that everybody went home safe that night.
Yeah, and I think people are likening this to like disrespecting the flag or refusing to sing the national anthem or whatever. I don't think that's what this was at all, and I don't think that you can really compare those two things. He's not burning a flag. He's not saying death to America, right? Like he is trying to keep the peace in a situation that had the potential for lives to be taken, right? This could have escalated very quickly into something violent, and he did what he thought was right in the moment. And whether or not you want to kind of armchair quarterback this in hindsight's 2020, we know a lot more about other rallies that weren't really rallies in other places in the country and stuff. We have the benefit now, looking back, of a lot more information than he had in the moment back in 2020 while he was trying to keep his community safe and doing what he thought he needed to do to achieve that.
Yeah, plus that whole bend the knee to BLM thing wasn't a thing yet.
Right. This was June of 2020.
Yeah.
Like, you have to really put yourself all the way back there. This was the beginning of all of this. This is not, I think that the narrative is just to try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like take him off of a good candidate place for governor and kind of bring him down a peg, whatever that word is. What's it called when you get demoted?
Demoted. All right.
Yeah, like demote him from that list, right? Because there's people who don't like him for a variety of reasons, or who just don't want a law enforcement officer in the position of governor. There's a lot of people who are kind of anti law enforcement having these bigger positions of power. And so I don't know. I think there's, lots of reasons people have for not liking him, but this to me seems like a really silly one to hang your hat on.
I agree. Again, if you're rational, if you're level-headed, if you really watch what happened here, you're not going to buy the narrative. It doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's frankly a little childish. I can't believe somebody would look at that and that would be their honest analysis of the situation, is that somehow he lost a battle to BLM or is now a BLM sheriff or whatever it is. It doesn't make any sense at all. So anyway, there you go. I still stick with my analysis from last week. We were talking about how unless 2 Republicans make it to the runoff, no Republicans will win for California.
Yep.
And right now, the 2 strongest Republicans are Bianco and Hilton. So there you go. So in conclusion, I think it was pretty clear to me. The guy did what was considered normal at the time, which was take a knee with a community leader in order to pray. The rest is just narrative. The rest is just, silliness. So, Sheriff Chad Bianco from Riverside County. So the lifeblood of every organization is membership. We absolutely need membership. And you as a Second Amendment activist want to be involved. You want to help make things better. And we have a way for you to be involved, get involved, and stay involved. Look at our volunteer page. If you go to sdcgo.org/volunteer, we keep it up to date, and there's always an opportunity for you to get more involved. Our bread and butter are our shooting socials, where we teach people how to shoot. They've never had a shooting experience. Maybe they're brand new to shooting and they want to have a first-time shooting experience. You can help us do that. Or if you want to help spread the word, we have tabletops at different gun shops, at different events, and you can volunteer to tell people more about the Second Amendment, more about how to get a CCW, or more about being a member of an organization like SDCGO. The good news is it's super easy. We'll help train you. We'll help you get involved. We'll give you the opportunity to do good things.
If you don't have the time to volunteer, there's another way that you can help too. We are always looking for folks to donate. And if you want to pledge $5,000 in this next year, we will have you on our show as a guest host. So come join us in the studio. We would love to have you here for one episode, and that is for a price of $5,000.
$5,000 donation to San Diego County Gun Owners gets you a guest host with me and Dakota and Alicia, and you get to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and you get to do whatever you want to right here on Gun Owners Radio. So thank you so much. Whatever you do, just do a little bit more than you did last year and help us defend and preserve the Second Amendment right here in your backyard. Okay, we're going to talk to Dr. Roy Taylor. He's a criminal justice and security consultant, professional law enforcement manager with over 40 years of experience in various federal, state, and local and private police chief positions. His areas of expertise is actually a very long list, but it includes police procedures, law enforcement training, use of force and firearms instruction, police pursuit tactics, electronic control weapons, recruiting, employee selection, and on and on and on. With over 40 years of experience and a couple of books under his belt, he has a lot of expertise. So we wanted to have him on the show and have a discussion about a number of different things. How are you, Roy?
Good, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Great. Well, why don't you, if you could, why don't you give us just a little bit of information on a couple of your books, your latest books. What kind of books have you written, and just bring us up to speed on that.
Well, thank you. My latest book that came out last year in December is called Being a One Percenter, and it's available on Amazon. but being a one percenter, and a lot of times you'll associate that with biker gangs. That's something they like to call themselves, is one percenters, but also only 1% of the country or population is in law enforcement. Less than 1% serves in the military. Less than 1% of that is in the officer corps as a commanding officer, a field grade officer. I'm also a PhD, which only 1% of the people are PhDs. I'm a pilot, only 1% of people are pilots. So I'm a one percenter in a lot of ways. And I've had a very good life and a very active life in the role of a law enforcement officer or chief of police. And I've got a lot of stories. So, you know, you always hear, oh man, you should write a book. You should write a book. So I wrote a book, and I try to make it not just a book about what I've done, but life lessons and how to be resilient and how to set goals. So it's really a how to be successful book was what my goal was.
And you've had, like I said, 40 years of law enforcement experience. You have really seen it all in 40 years. You've had a lot of different positions, a lot of different places. What's something you're particularly proud of? What's a thing that you've done or a position you've held or something you've done in your career that you're most proud of?
Well, for the most proud, I'd take that to being an officer in the United States Army, deploying to Iraq, being a platoon leader in a line haul transportation company. And my unit was attacked, ambushed on one of our missions. And I was able to save a life instead of take a life. And I really take a lot of pride in that, you know, I'm a decorated war veteran, but it was for helping somebody that had been shot and not having to shoot somebody. I may have done that, you know, we have to return fire, but something I'm proud of is, you know, being able to save a life and, you know, all that chaos.
That's phenomenal. That's really great. That's outstanding. You know, I've wanted to bring a law enforcement expert professional on for a while and talk about something that is kind of a struggle for gun owners. You know, we're Gun Owners Radio. I run San Diego County Gun Owners. You know, that's our audience. You know, we're Second Amendment advocates, and it is a struggle sometimes to figure out where law enforcement and Second Amendment advocates overlap. You know, how do we work with each other? How do we relate to each other? You know, there's at times so much. We have so much at odds that it's difficult to be on the same side, and it's difficult to wonder, hey, are we on the same side? And I wanted to see what your thoughts are with that. You know, in other words, where does law enforcement and Second Amendment advocacy and your Second Amendment rights, you know, where do they meet? Where do they conflict? And what are your thoughts on what's, you know, what's going on currently in that political arena?
Well, I'm a Second Amendment advocate myself, and I'm a firearms instructor for law enforcement and for security officers and for retired law enforcement officers. It's called LEOSA, Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, that President Bush enacted right after 9/11 to allow retired law enforcement officers and military officers to carry their weapons into retirement, and requires them to qualify every year. And I was a concealed carry instructor, but I let that go just because of the liability purposes that, you know, it's such a short course. It's an 8-hour course that you only have to fire 30 rounds at no greater distance than 7 yards. So, you know, I could do it, you know, behind my back, blindfolded, you know, one arm tied behind my back, you know, at that range. But I really think that those standards need to be increased a little bit to ensure the public safety, because I don't know if you're aware of what the average law enforcement officer hit rate is in the United States, but it's a dismal 20%. So that means that police officers, when they shoot you or shoot at you or shoot at a bad guy, they miss 8 out of 10 times. Well, where do those extra rounds go? They go into innocent civilians, they go into property, you know, they are going somewhere. But even the police officers that are required to meet minimum standards every year only hit 20% of the time in an actual street encounter. So you can imagine how, if like in North Carolina, where you only qualify one time and then you're good for the rest of your life as long as you renew the permit every 5 years. There's no other practical test or even a written test. You're just paying a fee, making sure you don't have any criminal record that's happened in between recertification. dates, but I really think we need to have at least biannual or annual qualifications for people that want to carry guns, because, a good example, my dad died of autism or Alzheimer's, and he had a concealed carry permit up to the day he died that was valid because he was in Tennessee, and all you have to do is pay the renewal fee every year or every 5 years, and my mom would write a check and let him keep it, but we didn't allow him to have access to firearms at that point. But I'm just using that as an example. That somebody that is no longer mentally capable of carrying a gun still has a valid permit and could do so. So
Well,
that's why I
I
think
want to
there
go.
needs to be some other checks and balances.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
want to go
Nicole.
back just for a second to the kind of marksmanship point that you were making. So, you mentioned that law enforcement, I've seen rates as low as like 18%. I think you mentioned 20%, that's obviously very low. And law enforcement does have high standards compared to a lot of states as far as like the concealed carry qualification course of fire. But with all of the concealed carry permits that we have in the United States and all these states that don't have high standards, what's your reasoning for why we actually aren't seeing concealed carriers shooting and hitting the wrong person? It's a very rare thing that's happening, much more rare than law enforcement shooting and hitting the wrong person.
Right. And we've been very lucky. And, I was skeptical back, almost 20 years ago when concealed carry started coming about that we would see a lot more shootings, but we really haven't. And there's a lot of great stories where an armed citizen has stopped an encounter. And unfortunately, the national news don't pick it up. And so we don't see what a good thing it actually is. But I think the people that are carrying guns are responsible. But I've also had the experience of a gentleman coming into a gun range that was offering the concealed carry course. He rented a 22 revolver and fired the 30 rounds with a 22 revolver. But then he went and bought a 40 caliber Desert Eagle and a shoulder holster and holstered it up and loaded it before he left the shop. And he didn't even know how to load it or much less operate it. But now he was out on the street legally carrying a gun that he's not familiar with the operating system. But I don't think that's the norm. I think most concealed handgun people are very capable and that they take it upon themselves to be a good marksman.
I can't help but think about the statistics that we have out there related to citizens who use a firearm in self-defense and how often they're not pressing the trigger. So they're still saving their life, possibly saving the lives of other people in these, violent encounters with people who are either, armed or who are acting physically aggressive. And just the act of pulling the gun out or showing the gun in that situation stops a lot of these attacks from becoming, actual violent encounters that could end in loss of life. So I think, we talked about it recently on the show, but how many times just pulling the gun out or showing the gun stops the interaction. And I think that has to, be related to why we're not seeing more concealed carriers getting in altercations where shots are going, where they shouldn't. But just the fact that a gun being present can help stop violence from happening to that concealed carrier, I think we also have to consider that. Some of those people who use a firearm in self-defense but don't fire any shots probably aren't the best marksmen, right? And so just because somebody doesn't want to or doesn't have the time or the financial ability to take private lessons and get really good with their firearm, for me, my perspective is that should not preclude them from being able to have a tool that can save their lives even without a shot being fired.
I don't either. I agree. I just would like to see, there be some regulation of even if it's every 5 years, just to make sure, just like with your driver's license, that you're tested, especially when you get older, to make sure that it's still safe for you to drive a car. I would think that would be a reasonable thing for gun owners to, have to demonstrate a certain amount of certain level of skill, even if it's 5 years after your initial course, you come in and fire the 30 round qualification course again, which basically just means as long as you hit the target, you're going to pass. And I don't recall offhand what the minimum score is, but it's like 17 hits out of 30 or something like that. It's fairly low. And I don't think I've ever had anybody not able to meet the requirement.
Yeah. What county are you in?
Wake County. It's the capital county in North Carolina, but the laws are statewide. They're
Statewide. Okay.
a law. It's not an ordinance or anything. There's some cities that did have ordinances that prohibited it, but again, the state law will trump it, and we really can't charge anybody if the city ordinance says you can't have it in the park, but the state law says you can. But I don't think any of those have been successfully, prosecuted.
And it's apples and oranges the way that a police officer and the way that a civilian, has to use a firearm. I'm never going to pull somebody over. I'm never going to deliver a warrant for an arrest. You're
never going to engage in a foot pursuit and then be out of breath and then draw and fire your firearm.
Yeah, so,
You're never going to chase a bad guy down.
It's apples and oranges, so I get it. But really, what I wanted to ask was, you talked about how, there was a law in the early 2000s that said, hey, law enforcement, if you've served for a certain amount of time, then you can carry in all 50 states, for the rest of your life. You can carry concealed for, well, whatever, until you're, as long as you're mentally, competent, you can carry. And then, which is great. I completely support that. But that doesn't help me as a civilian. And what will help me as a civilian is, for example, HR 38, which is CCW reciprocity, which will basically mean that my CCW, my ability to carry in all 50 states will be respected, just like, a driver's license. And no sooner had it been announced, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police came out against it. Now, I know you're not a spokesperson for that organization, and I'm not asking you to speak on their behalf, but there's so many times, particularly in California, when law enforcement as an industry or their industry representatives, whether it's their union or their association or whatever, either comes out against something that we're trying to do, something that will expand or preserve my right to keep and bear arms, or restore my right to keep and bear arms. They'll either exempt themselves and say, hey, that's not our fight anymore, so we're not going to help, or they'll actually come out against it. And it's as much as gun advocates and gun owners, civilian gun owners, non-law enforcement gun owners want to support. There's this natural thing that we want to support law enforcement. We feel like we're on the same side. We feel like we're, brethren. It's such a point of animosity when, hey, you guys have yours and you don't want us to have ours. You know what I mean? Like, you guys can own any kind of gun, any kind of magazine, carry it anywhere you want. And then here we're just trying to get the same treatment. And, too often law enforcement is standing in our way, or at least not supportive. And what are your thoughts on that? Like, how, as a Second Amendment advocate, how do I reconcile that? How do I reconcile my ability to want to support law enforcement and law and order? And by the way, you guys are a subset of gun owners too, with my, with what feels like, you're working against this. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I am surprised when I hire new police officers, how many of them have never owned a gun. And when I became a police officer in the early 80s, I had a gun collection back then as, a 21-year-old and was always looking forward to carrying my own gun because I would buy something better than the department would issue. And now I hire applicants that's never owned a gun, and, we issue them a weapon and teach them how to use it. But I'm just surprised that the culture's changed. Even look at the culture now. If you have younger teenagers that don't care if they get a driver's license or not. When I was 16, I couldn't wait to get a driver's license and get to drive the family station wagon out every now and then. But, kids today don't even want to get a driver's license. So it's interesting what's, society does. But I would say that really the best course of action to get a national concealed carry or national reciprocity is, go through Congress, get it to be a national law. And, President Trump had said, and you have a clip of him saying it, that he supports it. So it's just a matter of getting, the NRA or any other national organization that has a good membership base to, write their congressman and write their senator and ask for that. And, when it's coming up on election time, if you got a good body of people that they're going to need their support, most likely that's the best chance to get something across the finish line. But, I've been involved in things, and I can't remember offhand where you'd think, hey, this is a national interest. Why don't we do it? And then have, police chiefs or sheriff's associations stand in the way of, progressing something. So you just don't know. And part of that could be just a lack of education. I don't like citizens having guns. I'm not for that, but they don't know the facts. So again, their personal bias may be able to be won over with a rational, presentation. So, talk to the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We have a national conference every year. They also have regional meetings. There's also every state has a police chief organization in it. So there's so many ways that a grassroots campaign could make a difference as well. But, having some national organization that can make materials that are going to be standard across the 50 states would be helpful. And having those statistics of how many concealed carry holders actually were engaged in, having to use the weapon, or like Dakota said, have a statistic of how many times a gun was pulled but not ever used, that was never fired. So that's the best thing to do. But it's an uphill battle. I mean, it really is. And that's why I'm grateful that I have HR 218 or the LEOSA, because I can travel anywhere in the United States and do so legally with my concealed carry. But as a, private citizen, having my state CCW, which I also have because it makes it easier to buy a gun, I can't go to Virginia, our bordering state, they don't accept it. So, I understand the frustration, and it's a difficult thing if you're taking a road trip to, find out, okay, what states can I carry in? What states am I going to have to unload my gun and put it in a locked container and put it in the trunk or somewhere where it's not accessible? So it is a logistics problem. And of course, you don't want to, fall on the wrong side of that.
There had to be something out there that wouldn't kill you while you were cleaning your firearms, right? And that's what this formula ended up, being. It actually penetrates into whatever it is you're cleaning. All right, so our product is safe on all metals, plastics, composites, rubber, wood, leather.
Well, and I'm empathetic. I get it. Law enforcement, you guys deal with the absolute bottom of the barrel of society on a daily basis. Everybody you talk to is a liar. You're far too often on the wrong side of a gun or the wrong side of a knife. I totally understand that. I'm just, what is the role of law enforcement, in your opinion, when it comes to Second Amendment advocacy or Second Amendment rights?
To respect that constitutional law. I mean, it's one of our civil rights that officers have to respect. And as long as you're doing things the right way, they need to abide by the law. We had a situation that became one of our mandatory in-service training several years ago in North Carolina, where an officer had conducted a traffic stop. The driver was a CCW permit carrier. He notified the officer he had the gun, told him where the gun was at. The officer told him to, pull the gun out and give it to them. And it was a custom Kimber. So this guy had some money invested in it. And the officer took it back to the patrol car, disassembled it, and after he wrote the citation, took it up to the car and gave it to him in pieces, and he dropped the slide on the pavement and scratched it up and, damaged it. And, that became, a political football, because here's somebody that's doing the right thing. He's made the notifications. The police officer has no business taking that gun away from him. They should have just said, where's your gun at? It's on my right hip. I would say, sir, just, please don't reach for the gun, and, let me know if you're going to reach in that area. If you're going to go in your glove box or your center console to get something, just be mindful for my safety and that I'm afraid, when I know there's a gun involved. but I'm not going to ask him to pull the gun out, and then I'm certainly not going to disassemble it and give it to him back in pieces, because again, he's been honest. He's been upfront. He's complied with the law. There's no reason,
Right.
and the officer has no authority to take that gun away from him.
Well, I'm
I
sure
would
you,
certainly say don't argue that point on the side of the road. I mean, if the officer stops you and tells you to do something, go ahead and do it. But, if you don't think it's right, file a complaint with the police department. And in this situation, if he damages the gun and they don't want to pay for it, small claims lawsuit. But it created such a controversy that the state actually had a block of training mandated that every police officer take and tell them that fact, that if they're carrying it legally, they've made you aware of it, you don't have any reason to take it away. And typically, now, if you find that they've been drinking, obviously you're not allowed to possess a weapon after you've been drinking, especially driving a vehicle. So there may be circumstances that would warrant taking the weapon away from the person. But on a typical, you were exceeding the speed limit by 15 miles over, I'm going to write you a citation. Okay, well, I got a gun on my hip. Okay, well, thank you for telling me. Just please don't take it out or do anything with it. Just keep your hands away from it, please. And that should be the end of it.
Yeah, I'm sure you heard there was a case down in Florida a while back where the agency has a policy similar to what you just said, where they're not allowed to disarm, CCW holders or people who are legally carrying through the constitutional carry in the state. And an officer disarmed this gentleman, and as they were pulling the gun out of his holster to take it, they shot him in the leg.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the only case of that, but that one blew up. It was, all over the news and social media and everything. But I think it's an interesting point. You mentioned officer safety, and I think any law-abiding, normal citizen who's carrying a gun for their own personal safety understands that the officer cares about their safety, getting home to their family, and hopefully is going through, carefully making sure their hands are visible, all of that to get their documents. What I think where the trouble comes in is that some agencies, some places, the officer's personal bias towards citizens carrying guns is shown in their police work. So we've seen this in the city of Chicago time and time again. Chicago has these very strict gun laws, and even though concealed carry is legal and there's a long process you can go through to get your permit in the city, there are still officers who will detain and arrest people just for having a firearm in their car, even if they have a concealed carry permit, because the officers just aren't up to date on the law. And so there's actually a lawsuit working its way through in Chicago right now where multiple people were charged with felony possession of a firearm, even though they had valid CCW permits at the time. And that kind of came back to the initial interaction with law enforcement, and that the responding officers who pulled these people over for traffic violations or whatnot had their own personal bias that only bad guys have guns, and proceeded to treat them as criminals even though they were law-abiding concealed carry holders.
Right, and that's unfortunate, and that's ignorance of the law is no excuse for police officers either. And if they have policies that direct them on how they're supposed to handle it, then they need to be remedially trained so that they know. And if there's been any damages or inconvenience to the people, then they probably need to figure out some type of cash settlement to avoid a lawsuit, because it's very time consuming and expensive. But one of the stories I tell is I do this LEOSA training, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act training, almost monthly, where retired people come to me and need to be certified. And I tell them a story when HR 218 is what we call it, House Resolution 218, Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act. The gentleman retired from a police department in North Carolina and was on a vacation with his family up to the northeastern part of the country. And he stopped for fuel in Connecticut. And while he's at the gas station was robbed, and the robber had a gun, and the retired police officer, jumped into action and ended up shooting and killing the assailant. And you might think, oh, he's going to get an attaboy and the key to the city. No, he was placed in handcuffs and taken to jail and charged with felony possession of a concealed handgun and felony possession of hollow point ammunition. And he said, well, I've got HR 218. He said, we don't know what that is. We don't care. You're in Connecticut. You're going to, not carry a weapon, and you're not going to have hollow points. So, of course, now he's got to pay bail to get out. He's got to hire an attorney that's licensed in Connecticut and basically go to court and say, look, here is LEOSA. This is what it says. And court said, okay, you're right. The officers weren't aware of that, but it is valid. So we're going to dismiss the charge of concealed weapon, but we're not going to dismiss the felony of carrying hollow point ammunition. So he had to have instructors from North Carolina go to Connecticut and testify that in North Carolina, whatever ammunition you qualify with is the only ammunition you can carry. And he was qualified on hollow point ammunition. So therefore, that's all that he's lawfully allowed to carry according to our administrative code. And it finally got that dismissed too. But think of I'll say hundreds of thousands of dollars he had to suffer in legal fees and lost work time and, lodging and food, go to court, all because the officers were ignorant. And that's why having some type of gun owner insurance is a good safeguard, just in case you do have to use a weapon. I tell everyone too, if you end up using a weapon, expect to be placed in handcuffs, put in the back of the patrol car, taken to the police department, and questioned about it. So just be prepared for that. And a good way to be prepared is to join one of those companies that provide that extra insurance coverage, or contact your homeowner's insurance and see what coverages are available, because when it happens, you're not going to get a pat on the back most of the time. Most of the time, you're going to be treated like a suspect, and the best thing you can do is comply and ask for an attorney.
It definitely feels like we're definitely at a crossroads as far as gun ownership. I mean, there are more CCWs now than ever before. Half the countries out there are going with constitutional carry. Law enforcement, retired law enforcement, are able to carry, like you said, and it feels like we're at a crossroads. We're at a point where culture has to change. There has to be some kind of standardization, and I think that law enforcement has to start looking at gun owners and people that are carrying concealed or carrying for self-defense outside of their home. They have to start looking at them differently. And how does that happen? How does that standardization, how does that culture change, or what are your thoughts on that?
Again, back to grassroots campaigns, but on a national level, where you would just using the NRA for ease of understanding. There may be other organizations I'm not aware of, but have form letters made out. So all you have to do is put your name and address in there and send it to your senator or legislator.
Well, what I'm saying is the policies of the different departments, they have to change. The policies have to change to reflect the reality that more people are carrying. The law enforcement officers, their culture, their attitudes have to change. Their procedures have to change. How does that happen? I mean, how do we get to a point where every police department and every sheriff's office understands concealed carry civilians better and treats them differently?
Well, one way would be to, again, work with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, because they have model policies that they provide agencies for free. That, something that they've made legally defensible in context with current law enforcement standards across the country. The Police Executive Research Forum also makes model policies and writes white papers on these type of issues. And a company out of Texas called Lexapol is a big supplier of police policies to agencies, where they basically subscribe to their services to provide up-to-date policies and policy review, and work with them to come up with a standardized type of procedure for law enforcement, that if a person legally possesses a weapon, unless there's some exigent circumstances, that you do not relieve that person of that weapon, that you do not have the right to circumvent the Second Amendment. And North Carolina is an open carry state. So, I mean, I've been here since 1986 as a law enforcement officer. And, I've encountered people carrying open all the time. And I've responded to calls to, one that comes to mind was at a Hardee's restaurant, where the counter clerk called and said, "Hey, there's a guy in here with a gun." And, the dispatchers didn't ask enough questions. So we responded, and the guy's sitting there eating his hamburger with a gun in a holster. And so what's the problem? Well, he's got a gun on. Well, he's allowed to have a gun. There's nothing that prohibits him from wearing that gun out in public. And, they, as the public, were just shocked. And the same thing in another one of my agencies. We had a arts and crafts show that the Rotary Club was putting on, and there was a guy walking around with a gun. And one of the Rotarians came up to me and said, "Hey, Chief, I've never seen that officer here before." And I said, "Who are you talking about?" And he pointed to this guy who was open carrying a gun. And I said, he doesn't work for me. Well, what's he got a gun on for? I said, we have open carry in North Carolina. Well, I don't like that. That don't sound right. So anyway, I mean, you got a lot of ignorant population, and you have, police officers that don't have any type of guidance because there aren't any policies or procedures in place in the majority of departments across the United States. I think there's 12,000 police departments in the United States, and there is no federal guidance. Everything is all voluntary. So, I mean, when I testify in federal court on police procedure matters, and I'll often use IACP or Police Executive Research Forum policies and procedures or their white papers as part of the evidence. And of course, the opposing counsel is going to say, well, is that required? No, it's only a recommendation. It's a professional organization and making recommendations. And really that's all you have, because we don't have any national standards. And, one of the things that would really be great is if we had standardized reporting across the country, because, somebody, armed citizen that ends up getting into a firefight or using the gun to avoid that's not recorded on any database in the federal government. So you don't know state to state what's going on. And even in your state, there's no state reporting on those type of things. So, that's another area that could be improved on is how many encounters with citizens with firearms has been reported in this last fiscal year, and have some, drop down menus for them so you make it easy. But just the lack of reporting makes it difficult to mount any type of campaign, because you don't know other than just scouring the news to find these stories.
I definitely like to point, my CCW, I like to point out the fact that I have a CCW, which means that I went through a mental health check, a criminal background check, and my fingerprints are on file somewhere. Police officers should be suspicious of anyone that hasn't done that. I've proven myself. Law enforcement, it should be a pleasure giving me a speeding ticket. They should feel much safer knowing that I've gone through that process and procedure. I want to ask more broadly, law enforcement, the attitude of civilians towards law enforcement has changed significantly over the past 5 years significantly, but especially over the past 30 years. I'm going to say I think that things significantly started to change in the 90s when it comes to law enforcement. I think law enforcement had a much better reputation, a much better relationship with the civilian population 30 years ago than they do now. I think that some of it is not fair and not deserved, but I do think that a lot of it is deserved by law enforcement. We are seeing that some pretty horrible behavior by law enforcement. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. First off, do you agree that the attitude has changed, that things are far different today than they were 30 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. And like on my podcast, I've been doing basically a history lesson for people on the major case law that affect law enforcement, and really all case law other than in 1966 with Terry versus Ohio, and 1968 with Miranda versus Arizona, that requires people to have their rights read to them. Everything else that has affected law enforcement has happened during my career since I started in 1982. So I've seen Graham versus Connor out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tennessee versus Garner out of Memphis, Tennessee, Gant versus Arizona out of Arizona, obviously. So, I've had to adjust how I police over the last 30, 35 years because, of things that police officers do that are found to be not in line with the Constitution. And so case law has to be developed to stop it so that it doesn't go any further. So it has changed. My dad was a police officer. He was sworn in 1963. And of course, all the TV shows that I grew up with, Dragnet and Adam 12, or and the Andy Griffith Show here from North Carolina, were kind of my foundation and interest in law enforcement. And then when we had the Rodney King case in LAPD, you saw a shift. That's when all the California-based TV shows, that's when they stopped highlighting them and they switched to New York. You think about it, CHIPS and all those were all California-based programs on their law enforcement. And then all of a sudden, after Rodney King, they dropped California and started looking at New York as, a lot of these police shows. And even today, even looking at podcasts, that the number one area of the biggest population is 26% is crime and law enforcement. That's what people listen to the most out of podcasts. So 26% has that in common. But there's a need for law enforcement, obviously, and there's a very big interest in it. But there has also been a lot less interest in actually putting the badge on and doing the job because of Michael Brown case where he was tased and shot, and then you have, of course, George Floyd, and all these cases have really made people question law enforcement and look at them very critically, and they don't give them a whole lot of slack anymore because there's been a number of times where they've been caught, lying or covering things up. So out of the 99% that do things right, it's the 1% that do violate people's civil rights that cause all these things to happen. The poor public perception and the extra laws that are put on the books to help control what they're able to do.
Well, I appreciate you phrasing it that way and pointing that out. I do think that Rodney King was that incident was a huge shift. I think that was probably the shift in the attitude or relationship, I should say, between law enforcement and civilian. Even though Rodney King wasn't a great guy, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, if he was a good guy or not a good guy. What people saw in that video was horrible. It completely overshadowed, whatever people thought about Rodney King and whatever laws he was breaking. And it did shift significantly. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. Usually when I talk about it with law enforcement, they downplay, oh, that was an isolated incident. The incidents that you brought up, or, they weren't actually as guilty as you thought or whatever. And it almost doesn't matter because perception is everything, number one. And number two, the attitude, it's the genie's out of the bottle, the attitudes change. So what do we do from here, going forward? How do we, how does law enforcement adjust? What is law enforcement's responsibility to adjust? And then what are, where do civilians fit in? What do we have to do? What's our part in this?
It's incumbent on the law enforcement agency's chief or sheriff or whatever director, whatever their title is. They have to really come up with a good community engagement program. And I've always loved community policing because it makes officers get out of their car and have interactions with people. When I first introduced it to my police department in Norwood, North Carolina, when it was first coming around in North Carolina in the early mid-90s, the officers were used to riding around in a patrol car with the windows up, the air conditioner on, the radio on, and driving around aimlessly in their patrol sector until they got a call. And then they would answer the call and they'd go back. And when I told them they were going to have to be assigned a specific part of town to be their responsibility, and there were going to be community meetings and, basically fellowship type of activities to, get to know each other, they didn't like it. I mean, they were opposed to it. And I said, look how many TV shows are on about police departments or police officers. How many movies are about police officers? The public wants to know you. They want to hear your exciting stories. They're interested. I said, take advantage of that and get out there and talk about your career and your goals and how they can be a part of it and help. And that really makes a big difference. Once you get the stigma or the, just uncomfortableness of public speaking and interacting with people you don't know, I think they start to enjoy it. One of the programs I started was called Adopt a Cop, and we had a elementary school in town, and I took pictures of all the police officers, and I let each grade pick one of the officers, and that was their officer. And whenever that officer was scheduled to work day shift, they had to go in one day and have lunch with the kids, play with them on the playground for a little bit. And they hated it, at first, but then they got to like it. And
that sounds wonderful.
Yeah,
I would love that.
It was wonderful. And I won the National League of Municipalities Award for community policing for agencies my size. And when they came to town to do the assessment, when they were validating all the things we had done, we went to the school, and I wanted them to meet the principal because he was a really great advocate for the program and for the police department. Well, as luck would have it, he was gone that day. I said, well, let's look at the assistant principal. And he was gone that day or wasn't in the building at the time. They said, well, we'll just talk to this lady, the receptionist. And so they said, how are things changed since Chief Taylor implemented community policing? And she said, oh, it's great. The police officers are always here. They've hired a lot of police officers. We really feel safer now because of all the officers, and just going on and on and on. She did a good or better than the principal probably. And so when we were walking out and going to the next location, they said, well, how many new officers have you hired? I said, 0. I said, the difference is now is they're directed to do things. So now they have to come to the school at least once. Well, it would be once during their day shifts, or there'd be 2 day shifts during the calendar month. So at least 2 days a month, every police officer was going into that school and having lunch and playing on the playground. And we also had at the time, the NRA had grants for police officers to do the Eddie Eagle gun safety program. Yeah. And so I applied and got money for that. So we would have the officers presenting part of the Eddie Eagle program to the 5th graders. So again, it was all about, just getting out there and interacting with the community, having a good message, and letting them know, like we would say, no secret police shit. We're not a stovepipe organization. Of course, there's certain things we can't release to the public, but for the most part, we can be open books and transparent about what our operations are doing, what our goals are, how we're trying to achieve those goals, and what people can do to assist us. And basically through community policing, we're turning every citizen into a sensor, that they're out there in their neighborhood and they know who's doing what. If your kids are acting up and they're breaking into cars at night, somebody in the neighborhood probably knows who's doing it. And we just need them to feel comfortable enough to call the police so that we can take care of it so that people feel safe. And I think the other thing that was critical too was letting them know what the real crime in the area was. One of my departments was close to Charlotte, North Carolina. Of course, you've probably seen on the news where we've had 2 people stabbed to death on the light rail system there in the last few months. But Charlotte has crime. And so that's where the local TV stations are based, Charlotte. So people hear all about these gang shootings and other bad things happening, and they're home scared because they think, hey, that's here. Well, it's not. So by having community policing and saying, we don't have gang activity, we haven't had a shooting here in years. And so it just help quantify what's really going on in the area. But again, it's all through open communication and relationships. So that's what police officers are doing.
I think civilians want to root for the cops. They really do. And I think it's even more of a letdown when they see, some kind of extreme, misbehavior by law enforcement. I think it makes it even worse, because we want to root for cops. And I hope that police officers and law enforcement in general continue to give us reasons to root for them. Roy, I got to tell you, you sound extremely level-headed and pragmatic, and I really appreciate that. And very, very calm demeanor and very logical, explanations. So I really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on the show. It sounds like you're, doing a great job. How can people find your books or learn more about you?
Like I said, being a 1%er, I don't know that percenter is a word, but that's the name of the book, available on Amazon. And then my podcast, you can see behind me, is Internal Affairs with Dr. Roy Taylor on YouTube. And it's at Dr. Roy Taylor, all one word. Or you can try to look for the title, Internal Affairs with Dr. Roy Taylor. I think you'll get a psychologist or something that has internal affairs in their name, but dig down, you'll see my pretty hairdo and figure out it's the right place to be. But I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I looked at several of your episodes. So keep up the good work, and work toward a reciprocity in between the states, so that everybody that's qualified to carry can carry, and work to be an advocate of ongoing training or some recertifications, just so that when people do get old, and someday we're all going to be there where we probably don't need to have a gun in our hand anymore, or we think we're protecting ourselves, but that the gun may get taken away from us. So we have to be careful about being involved in situations where if we pull that gun out, we better be ready to use it.
Yep, understood. Check out, it's HR 38 actually that's making its way through Congress right now, which is the CCW reciprocity bill that we're all excited about.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, check that out. Dr. Roy Taylor, thank you so much. Appreciate all your time. Appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for making the time and coming on the show with us.
You're welcome, Michael, and thanks. Nice meeting you and Dakota, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.
So Megyn Kelly is somebody you've probably heard of. She used to be on Fox News, and then she moved around a little bit. And now she has what looks to be a fairly successful podcast and show, and is definitely been successful with her comments, or with her show rather. But her comments recently are something I want to bring up and talk about. This has nothing to do with where you stand or where we stand on the drug boats that are coming out of Venezuela. But during a show where she was commenting on them, she made some comments about the way that they're being attacked and what her thoughts are on that. And I thought it was a good opportunity from a gun owner's perspective to talk about what we thought about her comments. And basically what happened was they were debating the legalities and, hey, should they send the military in to, take these drug boats out? We're not going to comment on that. That's out of my swim lane. I don't really have that level of expertise. But when she was talking about the infamous double tap, when the military helicopters, destroyed the boats, but then there were still the crew of the boats were still there. Then they killed the crew of the boats. My understanding of what happened, and her view on that, her view on what essentially is lethal force, is I thought was interesting. Something I wanted to talk about. So we wanted to play that clip and what she said and thought.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected, a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American people.
Yeah. So I think by anybody's measure, those those comments are vile. I think that lack of respect for human life is misguided, uninformed, and doesn't exist in what I've seen of the gun community, the community of Second Amendment advocates who carry and train, and have CCWs and understand the legalities and ethics of lethal force. We understand that, hey, this is a defensive tool, not a tool for revenge. And I would suggest that Megyn Kelly, if you are having a hard time with empathy, that maybe you should become a gun owner. And maybe you should become a CCW holder so that you at least take the classes and get the training that we get. because what I've seen in the gun community is completely different. You know, I've heard it put that my gun is a shield, not a sword. And I always thought that was a really interesting comparison. In other words, I don't carry a gun so that I can be aggressive. I carry a gun so that I can be defensive. And, you know, it's not just an attitude, or it's not just a thought. This really does come out in the numbers. Gun owners, I should say CCW holders as a group, commit fewer crimes than the general population. Gun owners and CCW holders, I should say, as a group, actually commit fewer crimes than law enforcement officers as a group. I pulled up some stats. In several state-level databases, concealed carry permit holders are much less likely to commit crimes than the general population. For example, in Colorado in 2022, the crime rate for permit holders was reported as 5.7 per 100,000 versus 530 per 100,000 in the general population. That's dramatically lower. And for a CCW holder to be, you know, dramatically lower, to be dramatically, you know, better at following the laws, you know, that's not a coincidence. You know, that's not an accident. That's not something that just happened. Some reports, for example, the Minnesota and Texas data cited in various gun policy summaries, find that permit holders, 5 to 14 times less likely to be arrested for violent or nonviolent offenses that people than the general population, people overall. We are far better at following laws. We are far better at respecting life. We are far better at making sure that you know, we're not doing this punitively. We don't carry guns and use lethal force punitively. We do it to defend our life. And I thought we'd have a discussion. And Dakota, I know this is something you know a lot about. I thought we'd have a discussion on some of the curriculum and some of the policies and some of the best practices that CCWs you know, use. And I think that this I think it makes the population better. I think it gives people a respect, a much more healthy respect for human life than people that have never gone through this curriculum or never had to sit there and consider what they would do in that situation.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to like the instructor that you have in the class, because I have had students who come to me for renewals and their initial CCW class didn't really talk about like the emotional side of it, and the fact that, you know, a lot of people who get involved in self-defense shootings end up really having a hard time afterwards with PTSD, with, you know, just feeling depressed, feeling like maybe they made a mistake, they wish that they hadn't gone to that place that day. Just a lot of regret and guilt, even if they acted in completely lawful self-defense, because so many folks who carry a gun hope and pray that they never have to use it. And so when that moment happens where you do have to use it, you have to know that you can live with that. And in my open enrollment classes, we talk a lot about, you know, your mental state ahead of time and your mindset, and making sure that you're not, you know, picking fights, that you're being mindful about the fact that you have the potential to take somebody's life if an altercation becomes physical or becomes, you know, escalated. And we talk a lot about de-escalating and trying to get out of situations instead of going to your firearm. And I think, you know, the vast majority of students that I've taught in the role of CCW, especially the initial classes, they come to class thinking, yeah, this is just going to, you know, we're going to talk about some laws, we're going to talk about whatever. And they leave thinking, wow, I had no idea what a huge responsibility carrying a gun is. And I'm going to make changes in my life because I want to make sure that I'm like the safest concealed carrier I can be, and that I'm not putting myself in situations where I may have to use a gun.
Well, you know, I think just facing it, just facing that possibility that, hey, is this something I can do? You know, understanding that this is a particular mindset. Mm-hmm. You know, am I able to do something, you know, that might cost somebody else their life, even if they're, you know, attacking me? And you notice from her comment, she wasn't talking about pulling the trigger.
No.
She was talking about getting someone else to order someone else to pull the trigger so that she didn't have to deal with the consequences.
So that she could watch, which I thought was very interesting, because most people who who aren't mentally ill, who have watched somebody die, don't describe it as like a fun experience. Most people would find it sad, disturbing, even if it's a bad guy, even if it's somebody who is just trying to take their life. And that's why I think a lot of times civilians who have to take a life in self-defense do struggle with it, because they're not used to all of, the icky, awful parts of taking a life. The smell of blood and the suffering that person endures in the last moments of their life is something that a lot of people have never even considered having to live with.
Well, just the simple concept of that you're not shooting to kill. If in a defensive gun use situation, if you have to pull from concealment and use a firearm to against somebody that's attacking you or something like that, just the concept that you're not shooting to kill that person,
right?
You're shooting to stop the attack,
right?
Now it happens to be lethal force,
Yes.
So the potential for the person to die is absolutely there,
right?
And is highly likely. But the reality is you're not shooting that person in order to kill them.
Right.
You're shooting that person in order to stop whatever, horrible attack they're waging on you. You're just stopping to get them to stop you're shooting to get them to stop attacking.
Right.
I think that just that concept kind of makes you think about how much respect you should have for life. This is brought to you by Cargo, cases and rugged gear outfitters in El Cajon. Go to cargostores.com, buy something today, or visit them at 423 Broadway in El Cajon. There are two enemies of your firearms, rust and the government. The good news is Cargo has your back on both fronts. As a proud sponsor, they're helping us fight to get more pro-Second Amendment officials into office. And their rugged cases help you keep your firearms secure and protected. Built like a tank, Cargo cases are stackable, weatherproof, and ready for anything. Whether you're hitting the range or going off the grid, you need a Cargo case. Whether for your gun or other equipment, you need a Cargo case. And here's something that's just for our listeners. If you buy a Cargo case in the store at Cargo Rugged Gear Outfitters in El Cajon, just mention Gun Owners Radio, and you're going to get a free desiccant pack. And that's going to help keep your gear bone dry, battle ready, and rust free. Visit them at 423 Broadway in El Cajon. Great products, great prices, and uncommonly good service. Cases and rugged gear outfitters. Cargo. Check them out.
Right, 100%. In every one of my CCW classes, we go through an exercise where I have everybody take out a piece of paper, and I tell them, you don't have to share this with the class, so be as honest as you want to be on your personal paper, but I want you to write out the reasons that you think right now that you carry a gun. And at the end of class, the reasons have always changed. A lot of times people come to class thinking, I'm going to protect people around me, I'm going to stop a bad guy. By the end of class, almost everybody changes their answer to something along the lines of, I want to get home safe to my family.
Yeah.
I want to have personal safety be paramount, the safety of people that I love, but I am not going to go through all of that legal trouble and emotional turmoil for people I don't know. I'm not going to get involved if I see, something where I don't have the full picture. We do some scenarios where I show them videos and I ask them, what would you do in this situation? And, sometimes people share, and then I tell them the backstory. So like there was a tragic case where an undercover on-duty officer that was in plain clothes was making an arrest at gunpoint. And, I just show them that clip where he's making an arrest. He's holding this guy up at gunpoint, but it's not obvious that it's an arrest yet because he doesn't have handcuffs out. He doesn't have a badge showing. He's just holding a gun to this guy's head. And if you just watch that little bit of the clip, as a concealed carrier who's, not really thought through all the possibilities of what that could be, a lot of people right away will say, oh yeah, I would get involved. I'd try to save that guy's life. Well, then I tell them the backstory. Well, this is actually an undercover officer. He's making an arrest, and he did get shot in this situation by a concealed carrier. It's one of the only times I think in history that a legal concealed carrier shot and killed a law enforcement officer. but that case was just tragic. And that guy who shot and killed the officer, he was, a normal person who wanted to help save a life. He had great intentions, and now he has to live with the fact that officer didn't get to go home to his family, and that he killed an officer and, essentially accidentally to protect a felon who needed to be arrested, who should have been in prison. And so when we talk through those kinds of scenarios, people really change their mind and they say, oh, I would have never even thought that could have been the situation. Or, we'll show like a kidnapping video where it actually turns into, it was a custody case and the dad had custody of the child and the mother had been the kidnapper. You never assume that when you think of kidnapping. You think, oh, this stranger danger, right? This man comes and grabs a kid and the mom's screaming in the parking lot. But in that case, the dad was the one who had legal custody. And so if somebody had seen that unfolding and decided to get their gun out and shoot that kidnapper, they would have been killing the child's legal guardian. And so we just, not to scare people, but to kind of open their eyes to the possibilities. If we don't see the whole thing unfold from start to finish, we don't know what we're watching. Yeah. And our brain will jump to make conclusions, right? So people, long story short, people always change their mind about why they want to carry a gun, and they think about how important and how much responsibility there is. And I think if you carry a gun and you haven't thought those things through, or if you took a class where it didn't get into those types of things, really sit down and think about, what do I want to get involved with? What am I willing to give my life up for? Because if you draw a gun in in public, you are at risk of losing your life in that encounter. So just, be aware of that and think through, why am I a concealed carrier? What's my purpose? What's my mission? And what's my goal with this?
Well, I've definitely seen a lot of the classes. There's, there's that one person who's got this bravado that they're, whatever. Yeah. They're a cowboy. They're a tough guy, whatever they are. But that seems to get trained out. I think that they're, maybe probably just trying to be funny or trying to, perpetuate a stereotype or whatever. But by the end of the class, one of the other concepts that I really like that has been a constant in all the classes I've taken is the idea that the only way to win a fight is to avoid it. Yeah. And I think that concept is something that, people that are carrying for self-defense, they don't go out looking for a fight.
Right.
In fact, I know that since I've gotten my permit, I don't know how many years now, but just a few years, when we could start getting permits in San Diego, it does make you think more. Yep. Like, hey, I'm armed, I don't want to mess with whatever this situation is.
100%.
I'd rather just go home and avoid it. I've heard the stories about people having to hire an attorney or, making the wrong decision or, even with the best intentions, having to, go through the legal process or whatever. But then the ultimate is, taking a life. I mean, no matter who that life is, whether it's a good guy, bad guy, whatever. I mean, look at how much training somebody in the military has to go through in order to get into the mindset of taking the life of a bad guy. And even those folks, you hear interviews from Vietnam vets or, the global war on terror vets, special operations guys, whatever. I mean, yeah, they're able to take lives, and yeah, the people whose lives they've taken are horrible people, but that stays with them forever.
Yeah.
From what I've been told, what they've told me, what they've said in interviews. I'm not making this up. You and I aren't guessing.
Right.
They're pretty wide open, like, hey, this is a real serious thing. And, I really truly believe that going through that process, going through that training and being faced with those decisions and actually having to think about it, just holding the firearm, for the first time and thinking to yourself, okay, wow, this is something that can take a life. It definitely has an impact, maybe not all at once, but incrementally as you, hold the firearm for the first time and then shoot it for the first time. And then start, learning about the legalities and then start learning about the ethics of taking a life or using lethal force and stopping an attack. And the other thing is the gun community, particularly CCW folks, their commitment to first aid, the fact that they're obsessed with, carrying around an IFAC, an individual first aid kit. They're obsessed with taking classes. One of the most popular classes, after firearms, proficiency is first aid.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that it's probably more popular than other types of training, like self-defense in your home or long distance shooting, whatever. I think first aid ranks up there, in the top 5, of skills that gun owners want to obtain, and that's a respect for human life.
Yeah, and I think if it's not on your list or if it's something you haven't done, it absolutely should be, right after concealed carry permit training, whatever. First aid training is so important because it's not just it's not just a once in 10,000 chance that you're going to use it. Almost everybody in the course of their life will be a first responder to an emergency.
Yeah.
I'm 28, 28. And I have been at 2 separate heart attack situations where somebody's heart stopped working. I have been the first person on the scene of multiple car accidents, one where a motorcyclist was pretty injured, one where a car was flipped over, driver was pretty injured. I was the car right behind a girl who went off the road and went into a ditch, and her car was smoking and she couldn't get her seatbelt off. It will happen to you if it hasn't already. Those are all in the last 10 years or something. Everybody will at some point in their life be in a situation where their first aid skills will come in handy. CPR and first aid, AED training, stuff like that will come in handy for you in your life if you are a human that walks around in public. Sitting at a restaurant, you could witness somebody choking to death. You can save lives very, very easily with very little training. I actually think first aid is one of the easiest things because you don't need a lot of training to be able to make the best decision in the moment for that person.
Yeah.
CPR is so easy. Applying a tourniquet, so easy. If you know those 2 basic things, you can save a lot of lives if you're, out, if you happen to be the one there that can help.
Right.
So I 100% encourage everybody to take some medical classes. And if you've taken the basic stuff, I know San Diego County Gun Owners has advertised classes before for first aid. Check out the Instagram, keep an eye out for things. But there's a lot of really good classes for, car accident response. It's not just about tactical stuff and like, what if I'm in a shooting and I get hit? That's good too. Like, you should know how to self-apply a tourniquet, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just being a good citizen and being able to help save people.
Yeah. And, in conclusion, I truly believe that our community has more respect for human life than the general population. I'm continually impressed by the professionalism and thoughtfulness of people who decide to carry, for self-defense and go through the training and go through the classes. And I'd invite Megan Kelly. I don't really know her well. I don't follow her particularly. This quote, this little clip came across my feed, and I just couldn't believe how vile it was, how I couldn't believe the attitude. And I think that it stems from a lack of having to face that idea, of having to be, the one that looks in the mirror and says, hey, is this something I can handle? And really getting educated on what the ethics and legalities are, rather than just telling, the president to order somebody to go pull a trigger so that you can watch somebody bleed out. I mean, that's, it's unbelievably, I don't know, the lack of maturity, the lack of understanding there was pretty bad. So I would suggest that, and this is proof positive from her attitude, that one of the ways to continually improve society, to make a better populace, is to get more people to make the decision. Hey, maybe Megan should take the training first before you buy the gun. I think maybe the training should probably come first.
Yes.
But
I don't know if she should have a gun. Actually, unpopular opinion for this podcast, but I don't know that Megan Kelly needs a gun.
Well,
she's probably got armed security. She can be safe through them. I don't know that she should be trusted.
At the very least, I think she should do some soul searching, because I know that gun owners and CCW holders, we've already done that. We've done that soul searching. I think that we're better than the average person in society for going through that mental exercise, for actually facing that and coming to conclusions and educating ourselves. And it's something I'm particularly proud of. I'm very proud of our community. And, Megan, I'd suggest that you should consider taking the training at least. So there you go. Okay, a UCSD study finds strong link between gun ownership and partner violence. So this was actually published by Times of San Diego, but they're not the only ones that are publishing this report. Times of San Diego is a far left-wing rag. And so they're absolutely, I mean, they're on so many different subjects, they're absolutely ridiculous. Some of the worst reporters I've ever met are from Times of San Diego. But anyway, so this is the reporter that did this for Times of San Diego. That's their conclusion that they came to.
Right.
But actually, this study was fairly interesting. This is going to be one of those studies. You know how, who's the guy from FSU? Gleck, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you know how both, NRA and the Brady organization use his research,
Yes.
To make points. This study is going to be very, very similar. Okay, so a new cross-sectional analysis of populations in California and Louisiana have identified a strong correlation between gun ownership and intimate partner violence. The paper describing the study, which was conducted by researchers at the University of California, San Diego, right here in our backyard, was unequivocal. Quote, findings indicate those experiencing and perpetrating IPV are significantly more likely to report firearms ownership and recent purchase of a firearm, the conclusion to the scientific paper flatly stated. So that right there, we're off to a bad start. So they didn't say that, the reporter said that there was a correlation, right? But then they quoted that there's no indication there's a correlation. So we're already off to a bad start. The paper's authors say that they could not definitively link the causation of relationship violence to firearms purchases. However, the strength of the correlation. Okay, so again, we're already off to a bad start. So let's just go back. Here's what this is the author of the article, okay? The paper's authors say that they could not definitively link the causation of relationship violence to firearms purchases. Pretty crystal clear. The next sentence from this author, from the reporter, however, the strength of the correlation suggests that policymakers must rethink how they frame protective gun ownership narratives in relationships affected by violence. And those policymakers must look towards legislation that accounts for the complex dynamics involved in both domestic partner violence and firearms ownership in the United States. So, although this reporter was absolutely lame, they were like, look, there was no correlation.
But I think.
But let's talk about the correlation. But I do think that the way they described the conclusions later on in that paragraph are really, really accurate. Policymakers must look towards legislation that accounts for the complex dynamics involved in both domestic partner violence and firearm ownership in the United States. I think that's extremely fair. I think that's a good finding.
Yeah.
That it is extremely complex when it comes to firearms ownership and domestic violence.
Well, what's interesting is that I specifically work with lots of domestic violence survivors, and so I see this from the exact opposite point of view as the author of that article. But the background of this paper has some really interesting tidbits that I think anybody who has a brain between their ears would be like, yes, these things make sense. So in the background for this study, they said women who have been victimized by an intimate partner with a firearm are significantly more likely to engage in self-protective behaviors that involve firearms, including purchasing or borrowing a firearm, than women without those experiences. Let's just stop there for a second. That makes sense. If I was held up at gunpoint and I realized the only thing that could possibly save my life in that moment, if that person was going to use a firearm against me, is me also having my own firearm so that I could protect myself from their firearm use, that's just logical. I have so many women who have come to me because they were either threatened with a firearm, but also just like physically threatened or choked or beat so horribly that they were hospitalized. A lot of those women get out of the hospital and they say, I'm terrified. I'm in a safe place. He doesn't know my address now in my new location, whatever, but I'm terrified that he's going to find me and kill me. A firearm is the best option for those women to protect themselves, because if they are relying on calling 911, it's going to be too late. They're going to, the cops do not get there fast enough. We know this. SDPD's response time is like 35 minutes for priority 1 calls. That's the average, which means some calls take even longer. That is way too long if your ex-husband is breaking down your door to shoot and kill you. So I thought that the background of this paper made such good points that I'm like, yes, this is a logical correlation. Of course, these things are related. It goes on to say women who have taken such protective steps are more likely to believe that firearm ownership will protect them from future intimate partner violence, and may even have been encouraged by others to acquire firearms to protect themselves. Yeah, because if you have good friends and your good friends know that your ex has threatened to kill you, they're going to say, hey, you should also take some protective measures to be able to protect your own life. So it was kind of funny to me, like reading the study. I was like, yes, all of these things are just logical next steps for women who have been, threatened with a gun.
We just needed to be a rational human being.
Yes.
Well, and that's the thing. I got to tell you, all the political, phrasings and all the stats or whatever, no matter how people try to couch this, when somebody is in danger, man or woman, anti-gun or pro-Second Amendment, when they're in danger, they know that the most effective protection is a firearm.
Yeah.
It's just logical, makes it, no matter what their feelings are about assault weapons and CCWs and high capacity magazines or whatever. Mm-hmm. When you're in trouble, when your life is in danger, when your dignity is in danger, people just know, hey, a firearm is the way to go. A firearm is the most effective form of self-defense there is.
Yeah.
It cuts through all the political BS.
Yes. And even if somebody's like, a firearm's not for me, I'm too scared, I don't want to use one, they want somebody with a firearm to show up real quick. Yeah. So they know the firearm is likely going to be the solution for the violence that could occur to them. I know that there's a lot of, different stats and stuff that Moms Demand Action and some of those other groups make up based on data that doesn't really exist, where they say that, women are way more likely to be killed if they own a firearm than if they, like, just things that just have absolutely no truth behind them. But one of the things that I think constantly comes up is this concept that if there's an intimate partner violence situation and there's a firearm in the home, it's more likely for one of the parties to end up deceased. And I also say that makes sense. If you have access to a firearm and you are in a very high, volatile situation where somebody is potentially willing to take, extreme violent actions against you, it makes sense that the presence of a firearm, since a firearm is such a good tool for lethal force, that it could result in somebody dying in that situation. I don't think that necessarily shows a correlation between gun ownership and intimate partner violence, which is what the author of that article was trying to assert, that if you own a gun, you're more likely to beat your wife. Like, that's not what this study showed at all.
It isn't. In fact, a professor from UCSD, last name is Thomas, this is like you said, very fair and rational.
Yeah.
Given the high risk of lethal outcomes when firearms and intimate partner violence intersect, these results underscore an urgent need to better integrate violence prevention, mental health, and firearm policy, which is really what the pro-Second Amendment side has been saying, particularly that mental health part.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, and I've seen it before. I was on NBC, had this show called Politically Speaking, I think is what it's called, on Sunday mornings, and I went to discuss an issue with somebody who was from the Brady organization, and in the green room beforehand, we had this conversation, and they really truly believe that a gun causes violence. Mm-hmm. That they really truly, in other words, you could have two people sitting there, and there's no gun, and nothing bad will happen.
Right.
Like, they're not mad, they're not angry, they don't get physical, they don't try to harm somebody. That doesn't happen.
Right.
But then the same two people, and you place a gun there.
Yes. All of a sudden they get mad, they get angry, they get violent. Right.
And it sounds ridiculous, but I've seen that, I've heard that they actually truly believe that hunk of metal that machine with, springs and levers, just the mere presence of it causes people to be violent.
Well, I think a piece of this is that there's so many people on that side of the argument who have never actually watched footage of a man aggressively attacking a woman with just his hands. If you watch there is some vile footage out there. There's one situation, I can't remember what state it was in, but there was a in-home camera and a mom was home. Her kids, she had little kids. I think they were asleep upstairs and taking naps or something. She was home in her living room. A guy busts in the door and proceeds to drag her around her house, bashing her head into furniture. I mean, almost kills her. And I think so many people on that side of the argument who think the gun is what creates the violence or incites the violence haven't sat down and watched some things that make them go, oh my God, there are just evil people out there.
What do you think that would, what would that do? What would that clarify for them if they saw that kind of footage?
I think so many people assume that without a gun, she wouldn't die. She'd be just fine.
Oh, in other words, that the guy who, an unarmed man can't really hurt an unarmed woman that much.
Or maybe can hurt her, but it's unlikely that he could kill her. Almost any man can kill almost any woman if he wants to. It's just, muscle mass and strength and weight differences. I mean, if my husband wanted to kill me, he could, right? This is just the reality of people being stronger and bigger than you. I think where a lot of these folks who think that the gun is the problem or the gun creates additional issues, they don't realize the capacity that a man who has a violent intention can solve that problem for himself with or without a weapon. No. He can use just his hands. He can use just furniture. It doesn't have to be a knife. It doesn't have to be a gun. He can do the job if he wants to do the job.
Well, that's interesting. Well, I think that the study is interesting. The conclusions are interesting in that they're conclusions that we've already come to those conclusions.
Yeah.
So it kind of, in a lot of ways, strengthens our message. But I also thought that of all the articles, there are 3 or 4 different articles that were talking about the same study.
Yeah.
I thought this was the most interesting.
The most incorrect, for sure. I mean, they just came to their own conclusions.
They were really, truly trying to, put a spin on this. But, that one section where they were talking about causation, there was no causation. But then, or a correlation. There was no correlation. But then the correlation, it was absolutely ridiculous. So...
Yeah. One other thing that I thought was kind of interesting in this study. So intimate partner violence is, pretty common. It's pretty well studied, I would say. Intimate partner homicide was kind of a focus in this particular study. And they mentioned, some older data out there. They said older data suggests that women's use of firearms to protect themselves from an abuser is rare, reported by only 5%. But this may be shifting in light of the increasing firearm ownership reported by women and as women view firearms as a means of protection against an abusive partner. Importantly, more recent evidence indicates that women are twice as likely to use a firearm to perpetrate intimate partner homicide when their partner has previously wielded a weapon against them. So what's interesting to me about that is that they are saying that the woman is perpetrating intimate partner homicide when that's likely self-defense. And we see often that women who have been in relationships where they've been held up at gunpoint or they've had other violence occur against them, even California state law allows them to go to lethal force sooner than somebody who has not had that experience with that person.
Interesting.
So California self-defense law actually protects women victims with more ability to use lethal force and use it a little bit sooner than if I was just a regular, person who didn't know that this guy had a history of domestic violence. So I thought it was interesting. The study, kind of mentions that and pays homage to the fact that women are willing to take their abuser's life, which is kind of what a lot of people on the Moms Demand crowd, they say, well, the woman's just going to get her gun taken from her because she's not going to be willing to shoot him. I mean, it says recent evidence indicates that women are twice as likely to use a firearm to perpetrate intimate partner homicide when their partner had previously wielded a weapon against them. So women are fighting back. They are protecting themselves. Sad that it has to result in a death, but sometimes that is what it is. Sometimes in order to save your own life, you have to take action that could end in the attacker's death. But I don't know. I thought it was interesting that they're kind of showing that women are willing to fight back, and it's not that old adage of like, oh, she's just going to get her gun taken from her and he's going to kill her with it.
Well, I've never seen any kind of evidence that there's widespread instances of women getting their gun taken away from them. And I guess we've talked about it before, but it was really a big misunderstanding with the way FBI did their definitions.
Oh, right. Yes.
Where if, it was a huge percentage of victims were in a quote unquote relationship with whoever attacked them. And it turns out, thanks to John Lott, actually did the study, and he found out, well, wait a minute, the way they're defining a relationship is not what we think of as a relationship. Right. And one of the examples he uses is if you get into a taxi cab, and you say, hey, take me down the street, here's $5, you're now in a relationship with that person.
Yeah.
So
it's basically like if you had ever met them before.
Yeah.
Like it was basically if they were an acquaintance of yours.
So if that person pulls a gun and robs the other person, then okay, they were in a relationship together. Well, that's not what we think of.
Right.
That's that definite. We think of like girlfriend, boyfriend, or husband and wife,
right.
Whatever like that. It just turns out it's not true. It just isn't true. It's a myth, and it won't die, no matter how many times people talk about it. And the reason it won't die is because I think it's emotionally provocative. And they use it. It's a really strong. It's not accurate, but it's a really strong tool that they have to play on people's emotions. Go, oh, okay, yeah, all right, well, gee, we don't want that. Yeah, okay, well, it's not really a solution. When the reality is, study after study and just your own, rational, thinking, you realize that hey, women are able to protect themselves if they have a firearm.
Yeah.
Period. Yeah. Full stop. End of sentence. So. Well, there you go. So that's the UCSD study. If you go to any of these stories, you can read it for yourself. But I do think this is one of those studies that you're going to see both sides using for their own benefit and their own political uses. So there you go.
So I feel like I've been seeing this rise in people suggesting, especially with holidays coming around the corner, suggesting like gun-related gifts for their spouses and stuff. And on almost every social media post I see, there are comments of people saying, oh, you should get a magnetic car mount or a magnetic holster. Have you heard of this?
I've seen them. So so basically it's a holster that's got a big magnet in it, stick it to some metal or whatever. Are these the kind, are they also meant to be inside the waistband but you can transfer them to?
No, these ones are more like stationary mounts that stay in your car. And then the concept is like you take your gun off when you sit in your driver's seat to be more comfortable or whatever. You put it on the mount and it's supposedly gonna hold it there while you drive. And then when you get wherever you're going, you put it back in the holster. That's like the concept of it.
I got to tell you, especially when I had my Jeep, which I wish I missed my Jeep more than I do, but honestly, I don't really miss my Jeep that much. But anyway, I digress. Especially when I had my Jeep, I was always looking for some kind of way,
something to carry your gun in. Yeah, I feel like it's popular, and I understand like conceptually why it's so popular. Yeah. But what I have always kind of not liked about it, aside from kind of the car safety stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that it requires you to like take your gun off without it being in a holster, because most of these magnetic mounts, you put the bare gun on the magnet and that's what holds it on. Or maybe the trigger guard kind of clicks into the magnet. The magnet mount will have like a little latch on the side where the trigger guard clicks onto it. I really have never liked the concept of taking my gun off my body and having to point it at my legs pretty much, because that's, you have to kind of point it at your legs to get it out of the holster if you're in a seated position with the steering wheel right there. So
so you're carrying concealed.
Yeah.
You get in your car.
Right.
And then you disarm and put it into some other holster?
Yes, then you disarm, you stick it to your magnet, you drive around, do what you're going to do for the day. You get to your destination, you put your gun back on, and then you get out of the car. That's how people are using
Is it just a magnet? It's just a magnet? You
a
stick
lot
your
of
gun
times
to
it's
it?
just a magnet.
Okay,
yeah.
you know what? I actually had one of these, but
Oh.
but it wasn't for my Jeep. I had it under a desk. It was under my desk,
Yeah,
which is totally different.
It is totally different.
I had a desk gun.
Still not my favorite method of having a gun around, but I understand that a little bit more.
Okay. So they just mount this magnet in their car.
Yes.
And then while they're driving around, because it's hard to pull from concealment,
or because it's uncomfortable or whatever, maybe they just don't like how it feels to sit with the gun.
So they just stick it to this magnet. So I don't know. That's a great idea.
I don't
Is
like
that a great
it.
idea?
I don't like it at all. A couple reasons. One is if you have to get out of the vehicle quickly for any reason, now your gun's left behind.
Yeah.
Or, you stop and get gas, you forget, you don't put it in your holster. Things like that. Don't like it. Also don't like the, administrative handling. You're handling a loaded gun while the trigger is not covered by a holster. So now I'm in my car handling a loaded gun, pointing it wherever. And if I were to have a negligent discharge, that would be really bad. I could shoot myself. I could shoot my vehicle. I could shoot somebody on accident. Somebody, knocks on my window and scares me or whatever, right? I just don't like the concept of my gun being visible out in public at all.
Well, I don't even know the legality of that. Is that legal?
Some states let you. Yeah.
In California,
some
are you
states,
able to just have a loaded gun stuck to a magnet on your car?
So if you are a concealed carrier and you can conceal it from view, sure, technically. So like there's some where they have it down like near, if you envision the foot that hits the gas pedal, right? That knee has that little like plastic panel on your right hand side. If you were able to have it down there and it was concealed from view, I think technically California law would allow for that. But is it a good idea? Absolutely not. And now there's a video that actually proves how bad of an idea it is. So this video, we're going to show a couple clips from it, but this was called the Ultimate Car Holster Test. And they took a ton of different holsters from a variety of manufacturers, ordered them, installed a bunch of them into this like junky old car, and proceeded to take it through a variety of tests. So take a look.
Of the vehicle. And what we want to do is demonstrate with a real live car in the circumstances that these holsters might encounter all of the really important considerations about how to place these things, how to attach them, and whether or not you might even want to use them. And if you want to check out the behind the... I'm sure this is going to hurt.
Traction control. Oh God. Oh God. We can do it. We can do it harder.
Yeah. 2, 1.
Airbag, airbag, airbag.
Whoa.
All right. I mean, that was even worse than I maybe would have imagined.
That didn't go well at all.
The guns just fall out all over the place.
Yeah.
The airbag test was probably my favorite because if you watch the full video is pretty long. I think it's like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. But if you watch the full thing, you'll see kind of how the manufacturer's photos sometimes for the holsters or the directions just say like, put it in the panel under your steering wheel. And they're like, do people not know there's an airbag there? Like, that's not a good idea at all.
I know. You do not want to launch. I mean, an airbag is
it moves so fast.
Yeah. You do not want to launch 4 pounds of metal or,
into your kneecap.
Or into your face.
Yeah, or into your face.
Or
yeah.
Into any part of you. You just don't want to do that. You don't want to launch it at all.
It's not a good idea. Yeah.
Launching it into the air was kind of cool in the video. But
yeah, not a real gun, not for what we're trying to do, right? Conceal carry legally and safely. So
yeah, that
I don't
didn't
know.
go well at all.
Just as a holidays are coming up, PSA, you'll see all sorts of magnetic holsters, car holsters getting advertised on Instagram and all the things. Don't buy them. They're trash.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad I didn't buy one. There was, I I'm trying to think if I know there was one I was particularly interested in. It wasn't quite the same, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to ever buy one of those now. I think I'm done.
I think on body, I conceal carry in the appendix position. It's in between my hips, and the way that I put my seatbelt on still allows the seatbelt to work the way it's supposed to. I think it's the safest way to conceal carry if you're going to conceal carry on body. Your seatbelt has to be across your hip bones. If it's not, it is unsafe. And a lot of people I see, even like some firearms instructors, I've seen videos online where they're encouraging people to put the seatbelt behind the gun, which brings the seatbelt up into the squishy part of your abdomen. If my seatbelt tensioner goes off, which I've been in a few bad car accidents, it has gone off before, you don't want your organs to get squished by the seatbelt. You want the seatbelt to be low across your hips, across the bone structure, and also that doesn't allow you to like slide underneath your steering wheel. If you get in a bad crash and the seatbelt's too high, your whole body can just kind of like slink in the chair under the steering wheel. You can get crushed. So you want to be kept in your seat, and really the only way to do that is to have the seatbelt properly across your hips, your waist, not high up on your squishy part. On your tactical fluff, or
some people's, it's a little more squishy than others. So
yeah, perhaps, but yeah, no, we want to use the seatbelt across bone structure, and then for me, because the grip of my gun is over the waistband of my pants, I'll have the seatbelt low across my hips, and then I'll untuck my shirt from the seatbelt, so that I don't have to fight trying to get my shirt out of the seatbelt. If I need to draw my gun, my shirt's loose on the outside of my seatbelt. I can just lift my shirt and I have full access to the grip. It doesn't impede my draw at all. So we'll put a picture up of how I carry in the car too, so you guys see.
Well, the undershirts with the holsters.
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I started. I don't always carry that way, but a lot of times I carry that way, particularly if I'm driving, because I'm a bigger guy. I don't have a lot of room, especially in the seatbelt area. Yeah. So that was a solution I came up with, and
you're talking about like the under the armpit ones,
right under the armpit. Yep.
Is that comfortable for you? You find that?
Yeah, it's actually really very comfortable.
Wow.
And if you're wearing, it's especially good if you wear a button-down shirt. But even if I wear a polo all the time, and even if you're wearing a polo, you can get to it. Like everything, it takes practice. You have to practice with it. But you can, Superman your shirt and get to it. I can Superman my shirt and get to it pretty easy. And that, it covers the trigger. It's, got all the things.
Yeah, yours has like the little trigger guard protection thing on it, which is good. Yeah.
So, but when I'm seated, because I drive a lot, and especially on days that I know I'm going to drive a lot, it's way more comfortable. It's way more easy access. And when you're sitting down, and even the possibility of having to draw while you're driving, it makes it a lot easier for me.
Yeah. Hopefully none of us ever have to do that, but even more reason to wear your seatbelt properly, because it's way more likely you're going to get in a car accident than have to draw your gun while you're driving.
Exactly. Good video. I liked it. Thanks for showing that.
It's fun.
I'm going to pare down my Christmas list now.
Perfect.